The morning they auctioned the Porter place, the air in Daviess County, Indiana, tasted like failure and diesel exhaust. Sam Wheeler stood at the back of the crowd, his hands deep in the pockets of a jacket that was too thin for the November chill. He wasn't supposed to be here. His grandfather, Silas, who'd taught him to read weather in the shape of clouds and deaden the slump of a man's shoulders, had a rule. You don't go to watch a neighbor's demise. It's bad luck and it's poor manners. But Sam was here because the Porter place bordered his own West 40. And because the man conducting the auction, a slick-haired stranger from Chicago named Robert Vance, represented the new owners, Aether Capital, a Silicon Valley land optimization fund. The farmhouse, a white two-story with a wraparound porch where Sam had drunk lemonade as a boy, looked hollowed out. The barn's red paint was a scab peeling from gray wood, but it was a land that hurt to look at. 480 acres of the richest black dirt in the county, land that grew corn so tall a man could get lost in it, now tagged with bright orange auction signs like wounds. Van stood on the porch steps, a microphone in one hand, the other gesturing with the polished ease of a game show host. Folks, we're not just selling parcels today. We're selling potential. This is about the future of intelligent agriculture. Aether Capital is committed to maximizing the ecological and economic value of every square foot. Sam watched the faces around him. Old man Higgins, who farmed in the north, spat a stream of tobacco into the frost-stiffened grass. Maria Garcia, who ran a 200-acre organic vegetable operation with her wife, had her arms crossed, her jaw set. And beside Sam, breathing like a bull about to charge, was Eli Porter. Not the owner, his cousin Ben, had owned the place, but the last Porter still trying to farm. Eli was in his 50s, built like an oak stump, and he'd tried to buy the land from Ben's widow, Judy. He'd scraped together a fair price. But Aether Capital's offer had been 30% higher, all cash, no contingencies. Judy, drowning in the medical debt from Ben's cancer, had taken it. Eli's bid never stood a chance. We'll start with the Northeast Quarter, Parcel A, Vance announced. 120 acres of premium Class A soil, zone agricultural. Bid starting at $4,000 an acre. Sam did the math. $480,000. A price that assumed corn at $7 a bushel and sunshine 365 days a year. No local farmer could touch it. A man in a navy peacoat and jeans that had never seen dirt raise a paddle. 4,000. I have 4,000. Do I hear 42? Another paddle went up from a woman with a Bluetooth earpiece, studying a tablet. 42. The bidding climbed in $50 increments, a sterile, digital-feeling battle between three out-of-town investors who'd never planted a seed. The farmers watched in silence. This wasn't an auction. It was a dissection. Their history, their neighbor's sweat, their community's fabric, was being sold off by the acre to people who saw it as an asset class, a green checkbox in an ESG portfolio, or a future carbon sink to be sold to polluting companies. The gavel came down at $4,750 an acre. The peacoat man had won. Sold to bidder number 17 for $570,000. Vance crowed, as if celebrating a triumph. Eli Porter made a sound low in his throat, turned on his heel, and stalked back to his rusted Dodge pickup. He didn't slam the door. He closed it with finality that was worse. Sam followed him. He found Eli leaning against the truck bed, staring at the ground as if he could bore a hole through the china. Eli, don't, Sam. Just don't. What's the peacoat guy going to do with it? He ain't a farmer. Carbon credits. Eli spat, not looking up. Heard him talking. They're not going to farm it. They're going to plant it in some perennial grass. Maybe let it go to scrub, sequester carbon, and sell the credits to some airline or oil company. Get paid to let good farmland go to hell. The absurdity of it hit Sam like a physical blow. This land, which had fed families for a century, was being retired from food production to become a statistical abstraction, a guilt offset for someone's private jet. The West Quarter's next, Sam said quietly. It butts right up against my place. Eli finally looked at him, his eyes red-rimmed. You gonna bid, Sam? You got a spare $500,000. Sam didn't. He farmed 800 acres, half inherited, half rented. He ran a tight operation, used older equipment he maintained himself, and was, by some miracle, debt-free. His grandfather's lessons had stuck. Own your iron, own your land, own no man. But it meant he had no war chest. He had resilience, not liquidity. "No," Sam said. "I don't." They watched as the West Quarter was sold to the woman with the tablet. The South Quarter went to a silent bidder on Vance's phone. In 45 minutes, for generations of Porter history, a farm that had survived the Great Depression and the 80s crisis was erased. The investors clustered around Vance, shaking hands. The locals drifted away, their postures bent under an invisible weight. Maria Garcia walked over to them. She was small but formidable, her dark hair streaked with gray, her hands chapped and strong. "Una vergüenza," she muttered. "A disgrace." "They're just getting started," she said, her voice low and fierce. "I talked to Judy Porter. Vance told her Aether has a target acquisition footprint for this county. They want to assemble 10,000 contiguous acres. We're not looking at one farm lost. Amigos, we're looking at a land grab." The three of them stood there in the cold, a trinity of the surviving models. Sam, the cautious, debt-free traditionalist. Eli, the struggling family farmer hanging on by his fingernails. Maria, the progressive, value-added operator. They had little in common politically, socially, or agriculturally, but they shared a border, and now they shared a predator. "What do we do?" Eli asked, the anger burning out of him, leaving only ashes of despair. "They've got more money than God." Sam looked past them at the newly sold land. He thought of his grandfather. Silas hadn't just taught him about debt. He'd talked about the old ways, the ways before banks ruled everything, about barn raisings, about threshing rings where neighbors moved from farm to farm with their machinery, sharing labor, about handshake deals that were stronger than contracts. "We do what they can't," Sam said, the idea forming in his mind like a seed cracking open in cold soil. "They've got money. We've got community. They want to assemble land for an abstract idea. We need to assemble it to keep it alive." Maria studied him. "What are you saying, Sam?" "I'm saying we fight fire with something they don't understand. We fight it with a trust." That night, Sam didn't go home to his empty house. He drove to the heart of his farm, to the original homestead where his grandfather had lived and died. The old barn, built by Silas and his brothers in 1948 from oak felled on the property, still stood. It was his cathedral. Inside, under the dust and the cobwebs, was his archive. He pulled the string for the single bulb, which cast a weak, yellow pool of light. In the corner, under a tarp, was his grandfather's desk. Sam hadn't opened its drawers in years. He blew off the dust and lifted the lid. The smell of old paper, cedar, and pipe tobacco washed over him. Here were the records of a farming life lived on cash terms. Receipts for seed paid for with cash. Property tax statements stamped paid. And at the bottom, a brittle, leather-bound notebook. Sam sat on a milking stool and opened it. It was Silas's journal from the late 1970s and early 80s, the lead-up to the farm crisis. The handwriting was a tight, pragmatic script. April 12, 1979. Talk with Jim Barlow at the co-op. He's trading his 4010 for a new 4440. Financing the whole thing. Tried to tell him the storm's coming. He laughed, said I was a dinosaur. Maybe I am, but dinosaurs left fossils. What will he leave? Rust and regret. October 30th, 1980. The Carter embargo hit. Fuel prices double. Saw Jim today. Didn't laugh. He looked scared. The payment on that 4440 is choking him. Offered to help with my old baler. He was too proud to take it. Pride is a luxury we can't afford anymore. March 3rd, 1983. Bad news. The Thompson place went to auction. Bank took it. Jim Barlow was there. He looked like a ghost. He's next, I reckon. We talked after in my truck. He said, Silas, we should have banded together. Instead, we competed ourselves to death. He was right. Every man for himself is a suicide pact. Sam's breath caught. He turned the page. There, In a section dated 1984 was a heading underlined twice, Ideas, if we had it to do over. Below it, a list. 1. Formalize the threshing ring. Make it a legal entity. 2. Pool land titles. Not sell to each other, but hold in common trust. Surviving families keep use rights. 3. Create a fund. Every member pays in when times are good, draws out when times are bad. No bank loans. 4. Make the rule simple. Debt is enemy number 1. Soil health is priority number 1. Neighbor helps neighbor or we all fall. It was a blueprint. A radical, beautiful, impossible blueprint from a man who'd watched his community shatter. He'd never acted on it. The crisis had hit. Neighbors had turned inward with shame, and the moment had passed. The idea had fossilized here, in this notebook. Sam closed the book, his heart pounding. His grandfather hadn't been a dinosaur. He'd been a prophet, and his prophecy was for this exact moment. Sam didn't call a meeting. He invited people to dinner. He knew farmers. They distrusted agendas and PowerPoints. They understood shared meals. 3 nights later, around Sam's long kitchen table, sat 7 people. It was a fractious group. Sam and Eli, Maria Garcia and her wife, Anya, a quiet, sharp-eyed woman who handled their business logistics. Old man Higgins, perpetually skeptical. Chloe and Ben Carter, a young couple who'd rented 80 acres to start a pasture-based poultry operation, drowning in student and equipment debt. And, surprisingly, Joyce Henderson. Joyce was in her 70s, a widow who owned 300 prime acres free and clear, which she rented out. She was the wealthiest person in the room and the most cautious. Sam served stew made from his own beef and last year's vegetables. He let them eat, let the tension ease with the warmth of the food. Then, as Anya poured coffee, he placed his grandfather's notebook in the center of the table. My grandfather, Silas, kept this, he began. He didn't give a speech. He just read the entries from 1979, 1980, 1983. The room grew utterly still. He finished with the 1984 list. Formalize the threshing ring. Pool land titles. Debt is enemy number 1. He closed the book. Aether Capital wants 10,000 acres. They'll get it. 1 foreclosure, 1 desperate widow, 1 leveraged farmer at a time. They'll turn our food ground into a carbon spreadsheet. When they're done, this won't be a farming community anymore. It'll be a greenwash plantation owned by people in California who've never got mud on their shoes. So what's your idea, Sam? Joyce asked, her voice cool. A commune? We all hold hands and sing, kumbaya, while the bankers repo our tractors. No, Joyce, Sam said. A land trust. A real one. He laid it out, using his grandfather's list as a foundation. We form a legal entity, a non-profit, farmer-led agricultural land trust. Those of us who own land can choose to sell to the trust at a fair appraised price, not the inflated price either offers, but a real price that lets you walk away with dignity if you want out. The trust then owns the land. Forever. It can never be sold to a speculator or an absentee owner. Eli frowned. So I give up my land? No. You lease it back from the trust. A 99-year, inheritable lease. You farm it, you live on it, you pass the lease to your kids. The trust's only job is to protect the land and ensure it's farmed responsibly. The equity, the real wealth, stays in the community, locked up for generations. Maria's eyes were alight. The trust becomes a banker. It becomes a landlord. It takes land off the speculative market forever. Exactly, Sam said. And for those who don't own land, like Chloe and Ben, he nodded to the young couple. The trust becomes your path in. You lease from the trust at an affordable, stable rate. No bidding wars. No fear of the owner selling out from under you. Your sweat builds your operation, not your landlord's portfolio. Chloe and Ben looked at each other, a flicker of hope in their exhausted faces. Old man Higgins scoffed. And where does this magical trust get the money to buy Joyce's 300 acres or Eli's place when he gives up? We can have a bake sale. We capitalize it, Sam said. 2 ways. First, we all become members. We pay dues. Maybe it's a percentage of profit, maybe a flat fee. That's our operating fund. Second, we seek outside funding from people who believe in saving farmland, not exploiting it. Charitable foundations, conservation groups, maybe even crowdfunding from people in the city who want to know where their food comes from and who want to screw over a Silicon Valley fund. The room buzzed. It was audacious. It was complex. It ran counter to every instinct of private ownership that was bone deep in farming culture. Joyce spoke into the noise. It's a lovely fairy tale, Sam. But you're asking me to sell my land to a piece of paper you haven't even written yet, for less money than Robert Vance is waving under my nose. You're asking me to choose community over my grandchildren's college fund. That's not a choice. That's a guilt trip. I'm asking you to choose legacy over liquidity, Joyce, Sam said softly. Aether will own that land for maybe 5 years, until their carbon credit scheme plays out or the market shifts. Then they'll dump it. Who buys it then? Probably a foreign conglomerate. Your land, your family's history, becomes a traded chip in a game you can't even see the board for. In the trust, it stays ours. It stays here. The debate raged for 2 hours. Fears were aired. Loss of control, legal liability, the tyranny of a board making decisions. Hopes were whispered, affordable land for the next generation, a bulwark against volatility, a return to interdependence. They didn't agree to form a trust that night, but they agreed to one thing, to fight. And the first step was to slow Aether down. They need parcels that connect, Maria said, her strategic mind clicking into gear. They want a contiguous block. If we can put a spoke in that wheel, if we can secure even one key property in their target zone, we break their model. All eyes turned to Joyce. Her 300 acres were the linchpin. They sat in the middle of the area Aether was likely targeting. Joyce held their gaze for a long, silent minute. She ran a finger over the cracked leather of Silas Wheeler's journal. I'm not selling to your trust, Sam. Not yet, but I'm sure as hell not selling to that vulture Vance. A sharp, defiant smile touched her lips. Let's be a thorn in his side. Their rebellion began not with a roar, but with a legal filing. Joyce Henderson, with money from a pooled fund the group had hastily assembled. Sam kicked in $10,000, Maria $5,000. Even Eli scraped together $2,000. Hired a land use attorney from Indianapolis. The next week, Joyce filed a conservation easement on her 300 acres with the county. It wasn't a full sale to the trust, but it was a powerful tool. The easement, held by a reputable statewide land conservancy, permanently restricted the use of her land to agriculture and conservation. It barred subdivision, barred non-AG development, and crucially, barred its use for the sole purpose of carbon offset sequestration without concurrent sustainable agricultural production. The land's development rights were extinguished, and its market value for a speculator like Aether plummeted overnight. When Robert Vance found out, his polished composure cracked for the first time. He showed up at Joyce's farmhouse, not in his BMW, but in a rented pickup, trying to look folksy. Mrs. Henderson, this is a terrible mistake, he said, oozing concern. You just robbed your estate of millions in future value. My estate will be just fine, Mr. Vance, Joyce said from her porch swing, not inviting him up. It'll be 300 acres of farmland, not 300 acres of tax loophole. Aether could have worked with that easement, he pleaded, a hint of desperation showing. We have sustainable agroforestry models. But you don't get to own it, Joyce said sweetly. And that's the point, isn't it? The easement was their first victory. It was also a declaration of war. Vance's tactics changed. He stopped trying to charm. He started dividing. He went to the Carters, the young renters. He offered to buy the land they leased from an aging owner and then sell it to them with generous, patient financing from an Aether partner bank. It was a classic trap, the same debt lure that had bankrupted the 1980s generation. Chloe and Ben, terrified of losing their only foothold in farming, were tempted. The group rallied around them. Sam and Eli showed up at their trailer with a six-pack and a spreadsheet. They walked the Carters through numbers, showing how the patient financing would have them paying for the land 3 times over with balloon payments that would explode in a bad year. Maria connected them with a farmland program that could help them find safer land. They held the line, but Vance was relentless. He found other weak points. He approached a farmer named Dale, who was carrying a huge debt load from a new dairy parlor. He offered to buy Dale's land at a premium and lease it back to him for a nominal fee, freeing him from his crushing mortgage. It was a lifeline to a drowning man. Dale was ready to sign. The group had to act fast. They couldn't match Aether's cash, but they had something else. Sam called an emergency meeting in his barn, the very barn where he'd found his grandfather's journal. Dale's got 200 acres and an $800,000 mortgage, Sam said. The group huddled in the cold, their breath making ghosts in the air. The bank is nervous. One bad milk check, and they'll call the note. Vance will get it for a song at the foreclosure auction. We need to get there first. With what, Sam? Eli asked. Monopoly money? With a better offer, Maria said. We offer to buy the land through the trust we haven't even legally formed yet, and lease it back to Dale on terms he can survive. We take the land off the speculative market. Dale gets to keep farming, and we cut Vance off at the knees. We need money to buy it, Joyce stated. Real money. Sam looked around the circle. At Eli's stubborn hope. At Maria's fierce intelligence. At the Carters' fragile dream. At old man Higgins's grudging respect. At Joyce's hardened resolve. They were it. This was a threshing ring. Made flesh. We capitalized the trust. Right now. Tonight. Sam's voice was quiet, but carried in the still barn. We don't have Aether's millions, so we do it the old way. We pool what we have, not as an investment for return, but as a buy-in for survival, a membership share. He made the ask, his heart hammering against his ribs. Joyce, because she loaned the nascent trust $150,000 from her savings, secured by a note to make the down payment on Dale's land? Sam, he could pledge $50,000 from his cash reserves. Maria and Anya, $25,000 from their business. Eli, the Carters, Higgins, what could they contribute in labor, in equipment use, in future crop shares? It was insane. They were asking for six-figure commitments based on a handshake and a shared enemy. The risk was monumental. Joyce was silent for a full minute, staring at the barn's ancient rafters. My husband, Frank, she said finally, not looking at any of them. He died thinking he'd failed because he never expanded, never got big. He thought our farm was too small to matter. But it fed us. It put our kids through school. It was enough. She turned her sharp eyes on Sam. You're asking me to bet on enough. To bet that small held in common and debt-free is stronger than big, leveraged, and owned by strangers. She took a deep breath. Frank would have thought I was a fool. But Frank isn't here. The vultures are. She nodded. I'm in $150,000. It was the catalyst. One by one, in the shadow of Sam's grandfather's barn, they joined the rebellion with the only currency that mattered, faith in each other. With Joyce's capital as a bridge, they moved at a feverish pace. They incorporated the Heartland Roots Agricultural Land Trust as a 501c, too nonprofit. They drafted bylaws that would have made Silas Wheeler weep with pride. Key provisions: the debt prohibition. The trust itself could never take on debt to acquire land. All purchases had to be cash or seller financed. The farmer lease. Leases were for active farmers only, with strict soil health and sustainability requirements. Leases could be passed to a qualified family member. The Commons Fund. A percentage of lease revenue went into a shared fund for equipment sharing, emergency aid for members, and acquiring new land. The board. A board of 7, always with majority being active, trust leaseholding farmers. It was a revolutionary governing document, a fusion of ancient mutual aid and modern legal structure. Their lawyer, a sharp young woman named Priya, who'd grown up on a farm near Fort Wayne, took their rough ideas and made them ironclad. You're creating a poison pill for corporate agriculture, she said, a grin on her face. This is beautiful. With the legal framework rushing towards completion, they made their play for Dale's farm. They presented him with 2 offers side by side. Offer A, Aether Capital purchase price, $1.2 million, a high, enticing number. Lease back to Dale, $75,000 per year, with annual 5% increases. Aether owned the land, the carbon rights, the water rights, everything. Dale was a tenant on his own family's ground. Offer B, Heartland Roots Trust purchase price, $900,000, a fair appraisal base price. Structure, $150,000 down from the trust, with $750,000 seller finance mortgage held by Dale himself. The trust would pay him a monthly mortgage payment. Simultaneously, Dale would lease the land back from the trust for $400/acre/year, $80,000 total, with increases tied to the consumer price index, not arbitrary percentages. The math was stunning. Under the trust model, Dale would get a steady, guaranteed mortgage payment and a lower, stable lease payment. He'd have more cash flow and the satisfaction of knowing the land's future was secure. In 15 years, the trust would own it free and clear, and Dale's lease would be even more affordable. He'd traded a temporary sugar high of cash for long-term security and community membership. Dale, a practical man who'd seen enough neighbors get burned, chose a trust. When Robert Vance got the news, the war turned hot. Aether Capital filed a lawsuit against the nascent Heartland Roots Trust. The claims were spurious but expensive. Tortious interference with business expectancy, violation of unfair competition laws, even a hinted at claim of forming an illegal agricultural cartel. It was a slap suit, strategic lawsuit against public participation, designed not to win, but to drain their time, morale, and precious capital with legal fees. The trust war chest, the one they'd built with Joyce's money and their own sweat, was now facing a bottomless pit of attorney hours. They were in Sam's kitchen again, the air thick with despair. Priya, their lawyer, was on speakerphone. They can keep this in discovery for 18 months. Easy. They have a team of associates. We have me. They'll bleed you dry. So that's it. Eli said, his voice hollow. We lose because we can't afford the lawyer bills? That's the whole game. Not necessarily, Maria said. She'd been quiet, scrolling on her phone. She looked up. They're trying to crush us in the shadows of a county courtroom. What if we drag them into the light? She turned her phone around. On it was a professionally designed website, Aether Capital, greenwashing the heartland. It had maps of their land acquisitions, links to SEC filings showing their investors, including major tech figures and oil companies, and the store of the Porter auction, the pressure on the Carters, the lawsuit. It was clean, damning, and ready to go. I've been working with a friend in digital media, Maria said. We have the story, the villain, the underdogs, the grandfather's journal. For God's sake, this isn't just a local zoning fight. This is a story about who gets to control our food, our land, our future. People will care. Sam thought of his grandfather's words. Every man for himself is a suicide pact. Aether was betting on their isolation. Their weakness was that they were a faceless fund. The trust strength was that they were real people with real story. Do it, Sam said. The next morning, the website went live. Maria's friend had connections. A long-form article dropped in a major online agriculture journal. A sympathetic YouTube channel with 500,000 subscribers, which chronicled rural life, released a 20-minute documentary-style video titled The Land Trust Rebellion, Farmers versus Silicon Valley. It featured Sam, holding his grandfather's journal, Joyce, fierce on her porch, Eli, standing on the lost Porter land, the Carters, showing their struggling poultry operation. The response was electric. It went viral in agricultural circles first, then spilled over into mainstream environmental and social justice spaces. Donations started trickling, then pouring, into the Trust's legal defense fund via GoFundMe. $5,000, $20,000, $100,000. Messages of support came from other land trusts, from family farmers in California, watching vineyards be bought by tech billionaires, from young people in cities desperate to connect with where their food came from. The narrative flipped. Aether Capital was no longer a savvy investor. They were a predatory Goliath trying to sue a group of Davidian farmers who just wanted to protect their soil. Reporters started calling Robert Vance's office. He gave a terse, defensive statement about sustainable investment and property rights. It sounded hollow against the powerful, human story of the trust. The lawsuit didn't disappear, but the pressure shifted. Aether's investors, the tech figures who care about their public image, started asking uncomfortable questions. Why was their green fund embroiled in a PR nightmare of suing farmers? A month later, a white flag came from an unexpected direction. Not from Robert Vance, but from a senior managing director of Aether Capital, flying in from San Francisco. Her name was Lillian Choi. She asked for a meeting not at a law office, but on neutral ground, the community room of the Daviess County Public Library. The trust members arrived, wary and defensive. Lillian Choi was nothing like Vance. She was in her 50s, dressed in a simple but elegant sweater and slacks, and she had a calm, analytical presence. She had no lawyer with her. "I've come to understand we've been operating with a fundamental misunderstanding," she began, her voice level. "My analysts saw undervalued assets and a carbon sequestration opportunity. They did not see a community. They did not see a legacy. That was our failure." She laid a single sheet of paper on the table. It was a term sheet. "We are prepared to drop the lawsuit with prejudice. Furthermore, Aether Capital is prepared to sell you the Heartland Roots Trust, the 480 acres of the former Porter Farm, at cost, no premium." A stunned silence filled the room. "Why?" Sam finally asked, his voice rough. "3 reasons," Choi said, holding up 3 fingers. 1. The public relations liability of this conflict now exceeds the projected value of the carbon credits on that parcel. 2. Some of our investors are interested in the model you're creating. They see it as a fascinating, if small-scale, alternative, a kind of living lab. They'd rather be seen as enabling it than destroying it. She paused, folding her hands. And 3, because I read your bylaws. The prohibition on trust debt, the focus on soil health, the intergenerational lease. She looked at Sam. "My grandfather was a strawberry farmer in Watsonville. He lost his land to a bank in 1972. He died a broken man, working in a cannery. Your model, it would have saved his farm. It would have saved him." Her composure cracked. Just for an instant, the room saw not a financier, but a granddaughter carrying a different kind of ghost. "This is not altruism," she said, regaining her poise. "It is strategic capitulation and a minor investment in a narrative we now wish to be associated with. But the effect for you is the same. You get the land. You end the fight." They asked her to leave the room so they could discuss. The debate was fierce. Old man Higgins was suspicious. A trick, a Trojan horse. Eli was vibrating with the chance to get the Porter land back into caring hands, even if not his own. Maria saw the strategic masterstroke. Securing the very land that started their rebellion would make the trust unassailable. Sam thought of his grandfather. He'd have distrusted the offer, but he also would have taken the land in a heartbeat. The goal wasn't to win a moral victory over Aether. It was to secure the soil. They called Choi back in. "We have conditions," Sam said. 1. The sale is direct, no strings. No advisory role, no silent partnership. 2. You provide a public statement endorsing the right of agricultural communities to create land trusts. 3. You help us. Choi raised an eyebrow. "Help you how?" "You have access to capital we don't. Not for us. But you connect us with philanthropic foundations, impact investors, people who want to fund this model elsewhere. You use your networks not to buy land, but to help save it. You become a bridge, not a wall." Lillian Choi considered this for a long moment. A faint, genuine smile touched her lips. "Turning your adversary into your evangelist. That's good strategy, Mr. Wheeler." She nodded. "I believe we have an agreement." 1 year later, the first anniversary of the Heartland Roots Agricultural Land Trust was celebrated with a potluck in the yard of the old Porter farmhouse. The house itself was being renovated by Chloe and Ben Carter, who now held its 99-year lease. Their poultry operation was thriving, selling directly to restaurants in Indianapolis that featured trust land chicken on their menus. The Porter land, all 480 acres of it, was owned by the trust. 60 acres were leased to Eli Porter, who finally had the security to invest in cover crops without fear of losing the lease. The rest was divided among two other young farm families the trust had brought in. Joyce Henderson's land was still hers, but she'd become the trust's first major donor, converting her loan into a grant. She sat in a lawn chair, holding court, the undisputed matriarch of the rebellion. Sam walked to the edge of the field, where corn stood tall and green under the summer sun. In his hand, he held his grandfather's journal. He'd brought it to show the new families, to read them the 1984 list. Maria came up beside him, handing him a beer. He'd be proud, Sam. Sam looked out over the land, not just his, but theirs. A patchwork of fields owned by a piece of paper they'd all agreed to believe in, farmed by people who were no longer competitors, but allies. The trust now held over 1,200 acres, with a waiting list of farmers and a growing endowment from donations sparked by their story. Lillian Choi had, true to her word, made introductions. The model was being studied, replicated in other counties under threat. He wasn't trying to be proud, Sam said softly, running his hand over the journal's cover. He was just trying to find a way for us to survive, to keep the land whole and the people on it. He opened to the last page Silas had written in, dated just months before he died. The handwriting was shakier. Maybe the answer isn't bigger farms. Maybe it's tighter communities. Maybe the real crop we should be growing isn't corn or beans. Maybe it's trust. Sam closed the book. In the distance, he heard laughter from the potluck. Kids chased each other through the grass. Eli was showing a young farmer how to adjust the planter they now shared through the trust equipment pool. The storm that Aether Capital had represented had not destroyed them. It had forced them to remember how to build a barn together. The rebellion wasn't about fighting a corporation. It was about remembering that they were a community. And in the end, the land didn't belong to them. They belonged together to the land.